Tom had always prided himself on his physical abilities. He had the kind of athletic build that turned heads and the cocky confidence to match. Whether it was at the gym or at his local park, Tom enjoyed pushing the boundaries of his own strength, always looking for someone to prove he was the best. It was a Saturday afternoon and the park was unusually quiet, just the way he liked it. He had come out to run some laps around the track, a simple routine that usually gave him a chance to show off for anyone who happened to be nearby. As he jogged around the park, his eyes scanned for anyone who might be up for a challenge. That's when he saw him. The stranger. The man was walking calmly, his hands tucked in the pockets of a leather jacket, strolling slowly alongside a large dog. The dog, a black and brown German shepherd, had a regal air about him, moving with a silent grace that caught Tom's attention. He glanced at the stranger once more, then did a double take. It was him. Keanu Reeves. The actor. Tom's jaw dropped slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. He had seen Keanu in movies countless times, The Matrix, John Wick, and had always admired his calm demeanor. But today, in the real world, Tom saw a different side of the actor. He was just another person, out for a walk, minding his business. A sense of superiority washed over Tom. After all, Keanu Reeves was just a man who made movies. It wasn't like he had any special skills outside of the screen. Tom had no reason to be intimidated. Tom's mind raced with possibilities. This was his chance. Without thinking twice, he slowed his pace and called out to Keanu, "Hey man, you up for a little competition?" Keanu looked up, slightly surprised, but his eyes held that same calm, unruffled composure. His dog Max walked beside him, his gaze scanning the area with quiet intensity. "What kind of competition?" Keanu asked, his voice low and friendly. "Fitness?" Tom said with a smirk, his chest puffing up with pride. "I can tell by looking at you that you're in decent shape, but let's see if you're really as fit as they say." He motioned toward the open area near the track. "How about a race? Maybe some push-ups, pull-ups, whatever you want." Keanu blinked a couple of times, his expression unchanging. "I'm just here for a walk with my dog," he said simply. "But sure, why not? A bit of fun never hurt anyone." He gave Tom a small, almost imperceptible smile. Tom's confidence surged. He had expected Keanu to be more resistant, maybe even reluctant, but instead, the actor seemed completely at ease. "Great," Tom said, already taking his jacket off and tossing it aside. "You might want to stretch a little. You're gonna need it." He chuckled to himself, trying to mask the sudden nerves creeping up inside him. "Keanu Reeves, this is going to be easy." Keanu stretched his arms overhead, his movements slow and deliberate, exuding a calm confidence that Tom couldn't help but envy. Tom was already bouncing on the balls of his feet, ready to start, but the longer he looked at Keanu, the more he realized just how unfazed the actor appeared. It almost irritated him. Keanu's dog Max sat calmly by his side, his eyes fixed on Tom. Tom couldn't help but notice the dog's intensity. There was something in the way Max held himself. He wasn't just a pet. The dog's posture, the way he observed every movement, spoke of a level of discipline and training that Tom couldn't quite place. "All right, let's do this," Tom said, rolling his shoulders back and trying to focus. He could feel a slight tightening in his chest, but he shrugged it off. He would show this guy, this actor, that he was no slouch. Keanu simply nodded. "Let's make it a little more interesting," he suggested. "Why don't we add in a few more exercises while we're at it?" Tom raised an eyebrow, intrigued but somewhat annoyed that Keanu wasn't taking him seriously. "All right, but you better keep up." As they started, Tom quickly took the lead, moving with quick strides, confident that he could easily beat Keanu in this race. But as they jogged, something about the rhythm of the competition didn't sit right. Keanu was unusually graceful, keeping up without breaking a sweat. Max, the dog, trotted alongside, not breaking his stride, his eyes never leaving Tom's movements. Tom felt a flicker of discomfort. There was something unsettling about the dog. He didn't like the way Max's gaze seemed to follow his every move. It felt like the dog was sizing him up, waiting for something. But Tom pushed that thought aside. He had to focus on the race. The first challenge was a sprint, and Tom surged forward, putting all his effort into it. He could hear Keanu's steady breathing behind him, but he didn't look back. He was sure he was winning. He could already picture himself standing tall as Keanu, the famous actor, ate his dust. But then, something happened. Keanu sped up. It was subtle at first, just a slight increase in pace, but it was enough to catch Tom off guard. In the blink of an eye, Keanu passed him, his strides long and fluid, as though he had been holding back the entire time. Tom pushed harder, trying to catch up, but Keanu seemed to be in a rhythm that he couldn't match. Max, too, picked up his pace, gliding smoothly alongside Keanu, almost as if they were a team, like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Tom's heart started to race, not from the exertion, but from the realization that he was being outpaced by someone who didn't even seem to be trying. By the time they reached the finish line, Keanu was already there, waiting calmly. Tom was panting, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He was starstruck, not just by Keanu's ability to run, but by how effortlessly he had done it. Tom stumbled over to him, trying to catch his breath, but his pride was already on the line. Okay, he said, laughing nervously. You win. But that was just one part of the challenge. Keanu's eyes sparkled, and he looked down at Tom with that same serene calm. There's more, I know, he said, but I think we both know where this is heading. Max sat beside him, watching Tom with a piercing gaze. The dog's posture, still unwavering, seemed to communicate something deeper, something that Tom couldn't quite grasp. Tom felt a chill run down his spine. He had no idea just how much of a mistake he had made. The atmosphere at the park was charged with an energy that only a challenge could bring. Tom, now a bit out of breath after his initial defeat, straightened up and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He had underestimated Keanu, but he wasn't going to back down so easily. If anything, the first sprint only fueled his competitive spirit. He had to prove himself. He couldn't let a movie star show him up. All right, let's keep it going, Tom said, trying to shake off his embarrassment and regain his usual confidence. He gave Keanu a smirk. Let's do some push-ups next. I'll show you how it's really done. Keanu, still calm as ever, simply nodded. Sure, let's do it. He lowered himself into position without any hint of strain. Max sat to the side, watching intently, his eyes never straying from the action. Tom couldn't help but feel an odd sense of unease as he looked at the dog. Max's eyes were sharp, alert, focused. Too focused for a pet. Tom had seen many dogs at the park, but none quite like this one. The way Max positioned himself, sitting perfectly still yet radiating an almost unnerving awareness, suggested that this dog was not like any other. Tom grunted as he dropped into his push-up position. He was determined to put on a good show, ignoring the quiet scrutiny of the dog. The challenge was still on, and there was no way he was going to let this be a repeat of the race. He pumped out the push-ups with precision, trying to set a pace that would impress not just Keanu but himself. Keanu, as expected, was doing push-ups with ease. His movements were smooth and steady, no sign of effort. But Tom's attention kept drifting toward Max, whose gaze followed every movement Tom made. The dog's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing as if calculating, analyzing Tom's every action. Tom's heart skipped a beat. Something about the way Max was observing him felt strange, unsettling even. The dog wasn't just a companion. There was something deeply methodical in his demeanor. He wasn't just watching, he was judging. Tom finished his set and pushed himself up, dusting off his hands. All right, that was a warm-up, he said, trying to brush off the weird feeling in his gut. Let's step it up. How about pull-ups? Keanu stood up and stretched, giving Max a brief pat on the head. The dog's body shifted slightly in response, but his attention was still fixed on Tom. Sure, Keanu replied, his voice steady. Let's do it. Tom moved over to the nearby pull-up bar, mentally preparing himself for the next challenge. He grabbed the bar and hoisted himself up, his muscles straining as he powered through set after set. He couldn't help but glance at Max again, whose posture had shifted ever so slightly. The dog's muscles were taut, and his gaze had now locked in on Tom's movements with even more intensity. Impressive, Keanu said, not missing a beat as he joined Tom at the pull-up bar, effortlessly completing the exercise with a fluidity that only added to Tom's growing frustration. But it wasn't Keanu's effortless movements that had him on edge. It was Max. The dog was still watching, almost calculating each movement Tom made, as if he were preparing for something. After a few sets, Tom dropped to the ground and wiped his forehead, trying to keep his composure. It was becoming harder to ignore the fact that Max's behavior was just off. The dog didn't act like any dog he had ever seen. Max wasn't just sitting there like an ordinary pet. He was positioned with purpose, his eyes locked on Tom, his body coiled with an energy that made the air feel thicker. "Max has always been a good watcher," Keanu commented nonchalantly, as if sensing Tom's discomfort. "He has an eye for detail. It's one of his best qualities." Tom tried to mask his confusion with a half-hearted chuckle. "Right, a good watcher," he muttered, though the unease still lingered. What was it that Keanu wasn't saying? Keanu seemed to sense Tom's discomfort, but didn't push the matter further. Instead, he gestured to the next exercise, a timed run around the park. They set off again, racing down the track. Tom, eager to catch up, pushed his body harder this time, determined not to be outdone. His muscles burned, but he ignored the fatigue, focusing on Keanu ahead of him. The competitive fire in him flared up. This time, he was going to beat him. But once again, as he glanced over at Keanu, he saw something strange. Max was running too. The dog, instead of walking leisurely or staying behind, was running alongside Keanu with the same fluidity, moving like he was trained for this very moment. No lagging, no fatigue, just pure instinctive motion. Tom's chest tightened. This was more than a dog. Max wasn't just Keanu's pet. He was far more than that. The way the dog moved, the way he followed Keanu's lead without hesitation, the way he mirrored Keanu's every step. It was as if they were partners in a long-standing training regimen. Max wasn't just a dog. Keanu kept pace with Tom, his breath steady, but his eyes remained calm, almost unfazed by the competition. It was as if the challenge didn't matter. It wasn't about winning. It was about something much deeper, something that Tom didn't yet understand. They finished the run, and as they slowed to a stop, Tom was left gasping for air. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had always believed in his own abilities, believed he could outlast anyone, but this was different. This was otherworldly. Keanu turned to him, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You did well," he said. "You've got spirit." Tom forced a smile, but inside he was anything but confident. What had he gotten himself into? There was a deep, invisible connection between Keanu and Max that went far beyond what Tom could comprehend. Max stood beside Keanu, his posture still perfect, his eyes fixed on Tom with the same focused, calculating gaze. It was clear now that Max was more than just a companion. He was a protector, trained, disciplined, and connected to Keanu in ways that Tom could never have imagined. Tom stood there, sweating and breathless, realizing he had just begun to scratch the surface of a story far more complex than he had ever imagined. And the more he tried to understand, the more he felt that he was being drawn into a world that was beyond his control. Keanu turned, his voice calm and steady. "Ready for the next challenge?" Tom didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted back to Max, who was still watching, his eyes steady and intense. Something told him that this was no longer just about a fitness competition. It was about something bigger, and Tom was just starting to realize how deep the game truly went. The afternoon had grown intense, and Tom was on edge. He had pushed Keanu through a series of physical challenges, trying to prove he was the superior athlete. After all, he wasn't about to let a movie star show him up in front of the entire park. But with each challenge, it became clearer that Keanu wasn't just in great shape. He was almost otherworldly in his ease, his movements fluid and deliberate. Tom was losing, and it was eating him alive. Keanu had taken everything in stride, but Tom was tired of playing the nice guy. It was time to push back, time to turn the tables, and this time, he wasn't going to hold back. "You've got to be kidding me," Tom grumbled as they moved to the next challenge. A simple set of combat drills that had Keanu and Tom circling each other, taking turns trying to land a few blows. "You're really going to sit there and act like this is all you've got?" Tom mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. Keanu remained calm, barely acknowledging the insult. His eyes were trained on Tom, but there was a certain distance in his gaze, like he was already several steps ahead. Max, who had been standing silently by Keanu's side, suddenly moved. His body shifted from a relaxed stance to something more alert, more predatory. The shift was subtle, but Tom, for the first time, noticed the intensity in the dog's stance. Tom took a deep breath and threw the first punch, aiming for Keanu's shoulder, trying to push him off balance. Keanu easily sidestepped it, his movements a blur of fluid motion. But Tom wasn't about to give up. He tried again, harder this time, throwing one would land, hoping one would land. Max stood still, watching every movement with the cold focus of a soldier. But then something changed. Without warning, Tom lunged toward Keanu, intent on catching him off guard. In the blink of an eye, Max moved faster than anything Tom had ever seen. The dog was on him, dodging his blows with the precision of a trained fighter. Max leapt forward, using his body to knock Tom off course, sending him sprawling to the ground with a single swift move. Tom's heart raced. He scrambled to his feet, but Max was already standing between them, his body low to the ground, ready for the next move. Tom stood frozen, a strange combination of awe and confusion clouding his mind. "Okay," Tom panted, looking at Max. "What the hell was that?" Keanu, who had remained quiet through the whole exchange, finally spoke, his voice calm but with a seriousness that Tom hadn't heard before. "Max isn't just any dog, Tom." Tom laughed nervously, still trying to regain his bearings. "Oh yeah? Well, it sure as hell feels like I'm fighting some kind of superhero dog." Keanu didn't smile. Instead, his gaze shifted to Max, who stood still, his posture unwavering. "Max was trained for something much bigger than any game you or I are playing here," Keanu said, his voice dropping to a more somber tone. "He wasn't just trained to protect or guard. He was trained for specialized missions. Missions that most people wouldn't believe." Tom blinked, trying to process what Keanu was saying. "What are you talking about? You mean like police work? Security?" Keanu shook his head slowly, his eyes distant as he recalled memories Tom couldn't begin to understand. No, Max was a highly trained protection dog for a covert organization. An organization that handled high-risk situations, extreme protection, intelligence gathering, security in dangerous situations. You name it, he's done it. Tom's jaw tightened, and for the first time since the challenge began, he started to feel a twinge of regret. The dog wasn't just agile. He was combat-ready, trained for high-level operations. Max wasn't a simple pet or even just a guard dog. He was a trained warrior. The realization hit Tom like a ton of bricks. "He's been on missions, real missions, Tom," Keanu continued, his gaze now locking with Tom's. "Dangerous ones. He's had to fight for survival, protect people, secure high-stakes environments. He's been in situations you wouldn't understand. But the thing is, he's retired now. He's with me, because we share a bond, one that goes beyond just training. Max chose to be with me, but that doesn't change what he's capable of." Tom stood frozen, his mind racing. What had he gotten himself into? He had been so sure of himself, so convinced that he could handle this competition. But now, facing the reality of the situation, he realized how out of his depth he was. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a force, an unstoppable entity with years of training, expertise, and skill far beyond Tom's wildest expectations. "Max was never just a pet for me," Keanu said, stepping closer, his voice lowering. "He was my partner. He kept me safe in ways I can't even explain." Tom swallowed hard. His mind raced with a combination of disbelief and awe. Here he was, an overconfident man, challenging someone he thought he could outdo, only to find himself facing something entirely different. He wasn't up against just a man, but a trained protector, and his dog was even more dangerous than anything Tom had imagined. "So, you're telling me that dog, Max, was a military-grade protection dog, trained for all kinds of operations?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, and now he's retired, living with me. But those skills, Tom, those instincts, they're always there. You saw that today." Tom's chest tightened. He hadn't just been humiliated, he had been outclassed. Max wasn't just a dog, he was trained for combat, for extreme circumstances, and in that moment, Tom realized that his own pride had blinded him to the danger he had unwittingly stepped into. He had mocked Keanu, mocked Max, and now it felt like he was paying the price. Still, Tom's pride wasn't ready to admit defeat. Despite the heavy realization weighing down on him, he straightened up and wiped his hands on his shorts. "Well, that's impressive, I guess," he said, trying to mask the unease creeping into his voice. "But I'm not backing down. I'll keep pushing. You think you can intimidate me with some fancy dog tricks? I'm still going to win." Keanu's gaze softened, but he didn't argue. He knew what Tom didn't yet understand, that this wasn't a game anymore. It was a battle of egos, yes, but it was also a matter of survival, and Tom, with his arrogance and pride, still had a lot to learn. Max stood silently beside Keanu, his eyes never leaving Tom. The dog's stance was one of quiet readiness. He wasn't just waiting for the next move, he was calculating, preparing for whatever Tom might throw next, and deep down Tom knew he had no idea just how deep this challenge went. He had underestimated them both, Keanu and Max, and now the stakes were much higher than he could ever anticipated. But his pride pushed him forward, and Tom, oblivious to the dangers that lay ahead, stood ready for the next round. The sun had started its descent, casting a warm, golden hue over the park as the competition between Tom and Keanu reached its breaking point. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air practically humming with unspoken words, each move feeling more calculated than the last. Tom was determined not to back down, his pride refusing to let him admit that he was outmatched. Every challenge, every insult thrown Keanu's way only fueled Tom's need to prove himself. Keanu, on the other hand, remained eerily calm, a quiet presence that seemed almost detached from the escalating intensity. Max sat loyally by his side, his watchful eyes tracking every movement of Tom, his body still but ready, as if waiting for the inevitable moment when things would go too far. Tom, oblivious to the danger of pushing Keanu's limits, pushed harder. The physical challenges had become more aggressive, each one more demanding than the last. They had moved beyond simple feats of strength and speed. Tom had switched gears, now taunting Keanu as he tried to get under his skin. "Come on, Keanu," Tom sneered, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You're letting an amateur like me get this close? Are you really telling me that a guy like you can't even handle a little friendly competition?" Keanu said nothing, only shrugging lightly as if the challenge was of little consequence to him. But Tom could see the slight tension in Keanu's shoulders, a tiny flicker in his eyes that told Tom he was, at the very least, getting to him. Max, though, was another matter. The dog had remained a quiet observer, but now his ears twitched, his body stiffened, his posture shifting from relaxed to alert, his eyes locking on Tom with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You're pushing your luck, Tom," Keanu said softly, his voice unchanging. "This isn't about competition anymore." Tom laughed dismissively, throwing his shoulders back and standing a little taller, the arrogance in his expression impossible to miss. "Please, don't act like you don't want to win too. You're just scared you'll lose." Max's gaze never wavered. The dog's muscles rippled under his coat as if he were preparing for something, but he remained still, silent. Keanu, however, didn't seem bothered by Tom's words. He turned toward his dog, giving Max a brief nod, a signal that seemed to pass between them effortlessly. Tom took another step forward, his competitive spirit now bleeding into something darker. His pride had been wounded, and the more Keanu remained calm, the more it infuriated him. He needed to see Keanu break, to push him further, to make him fight back. "You know, I think you've got an overgrown lapdog there," Tom mocked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Why don't you go fetch the ball, Max? Maybe then your owner will finally show us what he's made of." Keanu's face hardened ever so slightly, but his voice was still calm. "Tom, that's enough." But Tom wasn't listening anymore. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Max, daring the dog to react. "I don't know how you let him get away with it, Keanu. A real dog would—" Before he could finish, Max was on him. It happened in a flash. One moment Max was sitting by Keanu's side. The next he was a blur of motion, faster than Tom could react. With a powerful leap, Max crossed the distance between them and knocked Tom to the ground with a force that took the wind out of him. Tom's back hit the grass hard, his breath escaping in a rush. He gasped, eyes wide with shock, as Max stood over him, poised and perfectly still, his eyes locked on Tom's with unyielding intensity. For a long moment there was nothing but the sound of Tom's rapid breathing and Max's steady, controlled stance. Tom's heart raced in his chest as he realized just how wrong he had been. Max wasn't just a dog. He was something far more dangerous. Keanu slowly walked toward Tom, his calm presence only amplifying the tension of the moment. He stood just a few feet away, his eyes focused on the scene, observing rather than intervening. "You made a mistake, Tom," Keanu said, his voice still even. "You thought this was all just a game." Tom looked up at Keanu, his body still shaking from the force of Max's intervention. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He had underestimated everything. The bond between Keanu and Max, the years of training that had forged them into something far more formidable than a man like Tom could ever comprehend. Max's eyes softened slightly, but the dog didn't move. He stood tall, still, waiting for a signal from Keanu, his muscles coiled in silent readiness. Tom's voice cracked, struggling to form the words. Tom's voice cracked, struggling to form the words. "I didn't." Keanu crouched down, his gaze never leaving Tom's. "Max didn't want to hurt you. He's protecting me, just like he was trained to. You provoked him, Tom. You pushed too far." Tom pushed himself up from the ground, still feeling the sting of Max's swift intervention. He wiped his face with his sleeve, trying to regain some composure, but his body was still trembling from the shock of the attack. "I didn't know," he muttered, his pride and ego now stripped away, leaving only embarrassment and regret. Keanu stood back up, his tone softening just a fraction. "You didn't know because you didn't stop to ask. You saw Max as just a dog, but he's more than that. We both are." Tom looked at Keanu, his thoughts spinning in a whirl of confusion and shame. He had made a grave mistake, one that he couldn't undo. His reckless taunting, his need to prove himself, it had all led him to this point, where he realized the real cost of his pride. Max's gaze softened, but he remained by Keanu's side, ever watchful, ever ready. And in that moment, Tom saw the truth. The bond between Keanu and Max went deeper than anything he could have understood. This wasn't just about a fitness challenge, it was about trust, loyalty, and a history that Tom had no place in. As he slowly backed away, his head spinning with the weight of what had just happened, Tom couldn't help but feel like he had just narrowly escaped something far worse. His challenge hadn't just been a competition. It had been an awakening. He was in over his head, and now he had to face the consequences of pushing too far, of underestimating the bond between Keanu and Max. And with that, he knew this wasn't the last time he would feel the sting of his own arrogance. The park was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the confrontation. The sun had fully set now, casting long shadows across the grass, and the faint hum of distant city sounds seemed like the only reminder of the world outside. Tom stood motionless, still processing what had just happened. His mind raced with disbelief and awe, trying to make sense of the whirlwind of events that had unfolded in such a short span of time. He had come here to prove a point, to win a competition against a man he thought was just another actor. But what he had walked away with was far more than he could have imagined. Max, the dog, had finally backed away from him, sensing the shift in the tension. The dog's posture softened, his body still alert but no longer rigid. It was as if Max had recognized that Tom, finally, understood the true weight of the situation. The dog turned his head, meeting Tom's eyes for just a moment, and in that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them. Respect. Tom, still on the ground, glanced at Keanu. The actor was standing a few feet away, his expression composed, unwavering, yet there was something in his eyes that spoke volumes. A quiet understanding, perhaps even a touch of sympathy. Keanu hadn't raised his voice once during the entire ordeal. Hadn't tried to escalate anything. He had allowed Max to act on his instincts when Tom's arrogance had reached its breaking point. But in the calmest of ways, Keanu had made it clear that the bond between him and his dog was not something to be challenged lightly. "Are you all right?" Keanu asked, his voice calm as always, but there was no judgment in it, no mocking, just simple concern. Tom nodded, though he couldn't find the words at first. His chest still felt tight, his body physically drained from the exertion, but it was the weight of the humiliation and realization that pressed on him the hardest. He had gone into this thinking he could best Keanu in a series of challenges. He had underestimated not just the man but the incredible team that Keanu and Max made. And in doing so, he had learned something he would never forget. I don't know what I was thinking, Tom admitted finally, his voice quiet, tinged with a humility that had never existed in his tone before. I was stupid. Keanu watched him for a moment, then stepped forward, offering a hand to help him up. Tom took it, though his grip was much weaker than it had been earlier. When he was standing, Keanu gave him a small but genuine nod. You weren't stupid, Tom, Keanu said. You were just trying to prove yourself. I get that. But there's more to strength than just winning or proving a point. Sometimes strength is in knowing when to step back. Tom swallowed hard, looking down at the ground. I thought I could outdo you. I didn't realize what I was up against. Keanu smiled slightly, not in a mocking way, but in a way that spoke of understanding. That's the thing. You weren't up against me. You were up against the bond between Max and me. And that's not something you can just compete with. The weight of Keanu's words hit Tom like a wave, crashing over him, finally breaking down the walls of arrogance he had built around himself. He had thought this was all about a physical contest, a battle of strength and willpower, but now he saw that this was about something far more meaningful. Respect, trust, and the incredible connection between Keanu and his dog, Max. A connection that went far beyond any competition, beyond any challenge Tom could have thrown at them. Max, who had been quietly watching from the side, finally approached. His demeanor was calm now, the same watchful intensity still present in his eyes but softened, as if he recognized that the threat had passed. Tom looked at the dog, and for the first time he truly understood what Keanu had meant. Max wasn't just a dog. He wasn't a tool for Keanu's amusement or a simple pet to show off. He was a partner. A loyal protector, trained for a purpose far greater than anything Tom had ever conceived. As Tom slowly approached Max, he hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then, without thinking, he extended his hand. Max regarded it carefully before lowering his head, sniffing gently, and then, almost imperceptibly, nuzzling Tom's hand with his nose. Tom's breath caught in his throat. It was a sign of acceptance, a subtle gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Tom, still stunned by the turn of events, took a step back, his mind quieting as the gravity of the moment settled in. He looked at Keanu again, his face now full of something unfamiliar. Humility? Respect? Maybe even a little awe. "Thank you," Tom said, his voice steady but filled with genuine appreciation. I didn't get it before, but I do now. I see it. The bond you two share. It's not something that can be broken by pride or competition. I get that now. Keanu nodded, his expression softening. It's not something you can force or fake. It's built on trust, loyalty, and respect, Tom. And that's what makes it strong. Tom took a deep breath, his shoulders finally relaxing. The pride he had once clung to so desperately felt like a distant memory, a part of him that no longer had any hold over him. Humility, he realized, was the true path to strength. It wasn't about outdoing others or proving he was better. It was about understanding, about recognizing the value of connection, whether with another person or with a creature that had been trained to protect and care for those who needed it most. Tom gave one last glance at Max, whose calm presence seemed to be the final piece in his understanding. The dog, so much more than he appeared, was a reminder of the quiet power that could exist in the world. Not through violence or dominance, but through the silent bonds of trust. Take care of him, Tom said softly, his voice sincere. Max is lucky to have someone like you. Keanu's smile was small, but it reached his eyes. And I'm lucky to have him. As Tom turned to walk away from the park, he felt a shift inside himself. A shift that could never be undone. His steps were slower now, more reflective, as he pondered the hidden past that Max carried and the incredible journey that had led Keanu and his dog to this moment. The competition, once the center of his world, now seemed insignificant compared to the deeper truths he had learned that day. For the first time, Tom truly understood the weight of respect and what it meant to be humbled by the incredible connections that went unnoticed by so many.